Hi everyone. In this video I'd like to show some enhancements to Illuminated Cloud support for Apex unit testing and analysis of code coverage. These range from seemingly insignificant enhancements to pretty considerable enhancements to the way that you can actually analyze the code coverage relationships. Let's just go ahead and jump in. There are about 5 different things that I'd like to show. The first one is one of those seemingly insignificant, and that is that the icon has changed for Apex unit test run configurations. And just to explain why, I've heard from multiple users who work on multi-language projects that the Apex unit test suites are indistinguishable from those for other languages. For example, perhaps they're working on a project with Java backend and then a Salesforce-based front end, and the JUnit tests for Java use the exact same icon as the Apex unit tests. And so now those should be very easy to distinguish in a visual way. Again, small thing, but hopefully useful for those that have run into that particular issue. The next thing I want to show has to do with code coverage suites. In the past, if you've changed connections for a given project, things like that over time, you may end up accumulating multiple of these Apex coverage suites, and there's been no way to get rid of them. You would click on it, and the delete button would not be enabled. The only way you could, I say there's no way, but the only way you could would be to go change an XML config file, which of course there's always risk associated with that. It turns out this was just an omission on my part, so that's been fixed. If you want to delete one, you can basically just click the delete button now after you've selected the coverage suite or suites. I'm not going to do that right now because I actually want to use this coverage suite, but now you can get rid of these accrued cruft suites over time. So let's go ahead and actually show this, and we'll move to the next part. So if we open the coverage view, the first thing I want to show is quite simple, but again useful, and that is you can now sort bidirectionally by the 2 columns here. Previously it was sorted automatically by the class or trigger name in an ascending fashion, and so if you wanted to find, for example, the uncovered classes or the most covered classes, it wasn't very easy to do that from this particular bird's eye view, the main coverage view. So now you can actually sort bidirectionally by these 2 columns to make it easier to locate what you're looking for. But again, starting with this version 2.1.4.2, there's actually an even better way to do this and in a more externalized and stable way. And that is there's now support for coverage report generation across all of the supported IDEs. This is something that wasn't available previously because the facilities only existed in IntelliJ IDEA, not in WebStorm, PyCharm, PHPStorm, RubyMine, those other IDEs. But I've worked with JetBrains and managed to encapsulate, or rather embed, that functionality with Illuminated Cloud with their permission. And so if we just click on this, and I'll just go ahead and give this a new name and say save, and we'll actually end up with an HTML version of this. Let me just move it over onto the screen, that you could just sit on another on a second screen, and you could then work through your gaps in your code coverage. So we can do the exact same thing. Let's sort by coverage descending, and pick Listenum here. You can see very clearly the covered and uncovered lines. If we go back to the corresponding view here, you can see the same information over here in the gutter, but it's not something you would necessarily want to keep active while you're actually editing the code. So now I can actually close this coverage view, put this view on another screen, and work actively against it in order to address any coverage gaps that I might have. So again, just a nice facility to visualize your current coverage status and actually work against it in order to provide better coverage. Okay, so coming back over here, I'm going to reopen that coverage suite because there's one other thing I want to show. And the next thing I'm going to show, there are 2 caveats attached to it, and I'll go over each in turn. So let's go back over here to Multimap, and as you can see in the gutter, there are covered lines and uncovered lines. Green is covered, red is uncovered, as we saw over here. If I want to know the exact tests that drove the coverage of this particular line of code, this individual line of code, I can click here. So there's a show tests covering line function, and so let's get into the 2 caveats now. The first caveat is that it shows hits 1. A hit means if the number of hits is supposed to correspond to the number of test methods that drove coverage of this specific line of code, and you can see it's 1. And if we click on this particular button, Show Test Covering Line, we will actually get a nice little pop-up that shows us that there were actually 15 test methods that drove coverage. And if I want to be able to visualize this in a little bit more usable of a fashion, I can just pin that to the bottom of the IDE window. And I can actually see the various test methods that ended up exercising this individual line of code. Most of them, not surprisingly, come from the test suite for this particular test, but it's also not surprising that a test for collections, for a utility class for collections, would also end up instantiating a multimap. So why the disparity between these two numbers? Well, it comes down to the Salesforce APIs for query and code coverage. There is a detailed S object, and there is an aggregate S object. And the aggregate S object is used to draw this information, this gutter information. It's extremely efficient to query. The detailed information is used when you actually click on this button. It is lazily queried for the particular line of code. It is prohibitively expensive to query in a broad basis for all the lines of code in, say, a particular class. And so as a result, the information about the number of hits is not in that aggregate object. If I find that it is, or if it's added in the future, then this correspondence will be accurate. But at present, it'll always say hits 1 for a covered line of code. And if you want to see the specific test that actually drove coverage of that line, you can just click and you can drill in. Now it's time for the second caveat. Right now, if you try to do this in IntelliJ IDEA or WebStorm or whatever it happens to be, the 2020.2 version, the latest release version, it will silently do nothing. And if you look at your log, it'll be a null pointer exception. This is a bug that I've found with the JetBrains IDEs, the 2020.2 IDEs with this particular feature, and I've reported it to them, and they have let me know actually as of this morning that it will be in the 2020.3 release, which is only a few weeks away. So I'm releasing this feature because it actually does work in the 2019.3 versions, and within the next couple of weeks it'll work here. But for the moment, if you've watched this video, this demo, or you've read the release notes, and you come into your 2020.2 version, you click this and nothing happens, that's why. And it'll be available very soon. You won't need to update Illuminated Cloud. It'll just start working as soon as you update the base IDE to 2020.3, or even the next 2020.3 EAP, the early access. But anyway, this obviously provides a great way to understand where the coverage comes from. What particular test code is driving the coverage of your production code. Okay, so let's move on to the last of the enhancements I want to show, and it again is more of a usability enhancement. I'm going to create a new project. It doesn't matter whether it's a metadata format project or a Salesforce DX source format project, so we'll just say source format with all tests, and I'm going to say next. And there's a new project creation option. Doesn't matter how you're creating the project, as long as you're creating it from scratch, not from version control or the existing file system files. But if you're creating it from scratch, there's this new option, create all tests, Apex unit test run configuration, that after you update to 2.1.4.2 or higher, it's going to default to true. It'll be on. If it's something you don't want, and I think most people will want this, but if it's something you don't want, you can just uncheck it, and Illuminated Cloud will remember that for the next time you create a project. So if you want to disable it, it'll stay disabled. If you want it enabled, it will stay enabled. That will be the default disposition. So let's go ahead and create this project. I will go ahead and put this project into a new window, and it will prompt me to choose a connection for this project. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And after I choose a connection, one thing you'll notice right here in the toolbar is that we now have an all test unit test configuration, exactly what we wanted. If we open that up, we can see that it created a unit test configuration called all tests with the all test checkbox enabled so that you don't have to actually ever maintain this. Set up for the default logging level. This is actually a new logging level that's been added specifically for this, but I think it's useful to people. It's the same one you get in the developer console by default, where everything's info except for Apex code and system, which are both set to debug. And it's set up against your selected connection, and it is actually stored as a distinct file so that you can of your project configuration be shared with your team. And this just makes it easier to come in and then run all tests at any given time against your project. So just a convenience thing. It's something quite a few people have asked for. It's something I've actually wanted, and so it's been put in place. Again, this is only for new projects created from scratch. If you're pulling something out from version control, it's not going to change the set of files for version control. If I find that people want that they want this always added when it's not present, just let me know, and I'm happy to make it an option no matter how you create a project. So those are the new features around unit testing and code coverage. Again, most of them are usability. There's one that's a significant enhancement in terms of analysis, basically the coverage by test analysis. It's never been in Illuminated Cloud before. And so hopefully you find these useful. And thank you for your time. I hope everyone's staying healthy and take care.